Conversations with Nicole. Conversations with Nicole. Let's talk about it. Tell me all about it. I'm here. I wanna know what's on your mind. Ooh, the world needs to hear from you, and I'm so glad to have a conversation to reach the nation. And it's all about you. We'll help each other to discover innovative ways to positively change the world. Let's talk about. Let's talk about. Yeah. Let's talk about conversations with Nicole.
Greetings, welcome to Conversations with Nicole. I am Nicole Everett, your host, and today my very special guest is Leigh-Ann Buchanan, author, strategist, leader, attorney. Welcome, Leigh-Ann.
Well, thank you, Nicole. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so glad to be here with you. Now, you and I met about a month ago on Clubhouse.
Oh, yes.
Interestingly enough, and now here I am talking with you live and in person.
This is the way the world works. It is much smaller than we realize.
It absolutely is. So tell me, who is Leigh-Ann?
So, Nicole, that's a question that I'm still trying to figure out. But the best way to answer that is I am a person that is really motivated by a couple things. People, purpose, and impact over everything else. Those are the things that I believe are the through line between so many of my projects, different initiatives and endeavors that I have the privilege of leading. And then how I define myself in a very kind of in the box way is I am a writer and a strategist and a facilitator. And that looks like many different things depending on the organization or platform that I'm leading.
What hat you're wearing, right?
Yes, exactly.
Very good. Now, what brought you to Miami?
I honestly came to Miami to attend law school. So I am a recovering attorney, but I still have a license to practice law in the state of Florida and in federal courts. But I came to Miami to attend law school. I was fortunate enough to win a full scholarship to law school after having completed my undergraduate studies at Bethune-Cookman, now University in Daytona Beach, which is HBCU.
Go Wildcats.
Of course, of course.
We're not going to hold that against you. HBCU love.
Exactly. It's one big family as far as I'm concerned.
Indeed. So you were former founding director of Venture Cafe Miami. So tell me about that experience.
Yeah, so the organization that I run is called Air Ventures, and part of the work we do in helping to really design and build ready ecosystems around tech and innovation, which focuses on racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. Part of that work involves ventures. We will internally scale up projects that provide a solution to a gap in an ecosystem. So the first project that we actually got a chance to work on was Venture Cafe Miami. We held the license to operate the Venture Cafe Miami right here in South Florida, and that organization really focused on creating more of a connective tissue in the community around tech, entrepreneurship, and innovation. And the primary way that it did that was through programming, kind of convening and connecting the different innovators across lines of division, across different spheres, from government to educational institution, from investors, private sector, corporate, so that they can be able to understand where there are points of synergy, collaboration, and connection. And most of our programming in about a 5-year period was able to attract about 54,000 innovators. And what I love is of the folks that came in the door, 70% people of color, 49% women. But most importantly, we were able to partner with about 1,000 organizations, both locally, nationally, and internationally in that short period of time. And what that yielded was content partnerships that resulted in about 3,500 hours of entrepreneurial support. I actually think it's more because we didn't start tracking right away. But that's what I say when we talk about exponential impact. If you really approach using ecosystems and think about how all the pieces fit together, then you yield exponential impact.
Now, what kind of team did you have to have? Do you have to have in order to make
Whew.
something like this work? Because that sounds like quite an undertaking.
So we were 2.5 people up until the end of 2018. Wow. So with the support of Knight Foundation, the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, we got a catalytic grant of $1 million at the end of 2018, a multi-year grant that really allowed us to build capacity in terms of hiring more staff. We're a team of 7 now. And more importantly, it gave us a little bit more leeway to try different programming that wasn't related to Venture Cafe, that helped to solve some of the gaps, at least begin to solve some of the gaps we saw in terms of access and equity and connecting to opportunities, connecting to capital in our local community, particularly through a lens of how do we support the most underserved and marginalized groups, which is often people of color, women, and those people that don't identify as gender conforming.
So how big of a role does identity play in that? I mean, because, when we talk about tech, I typically think of white men as dominating that, that sector. So now we're talking about people of color and women getting involved, and, maybe they might feel like this is not really a space that I necessarily belong in because of historically who has occupied that space. So how does identity play a role in that?
So it's interesting you asked that question. I actually have a book forthcoming that seeks to answer the question, because one of the things that I realized in looking at how we can help all these innovators, irrespective of where they're coming from, was a lot of people that may identify as marginalized or fit within those groups, they did not see themselves as innovators. They didn't see themselves as founders. In fact, that terminology was often so alienating. And what I began to realize, there's multiple forms of personal capital that we really need to invest in. One of the forms that is so important is what I call inspiration capital. And that's the type of capital that's developed when you're exposed to people who are in positions of power, authority, influence, success, whose experience reflects yours. It could be race, it could be gender, it could be socioeconomic status, it could be, similar, stories of origin, whatever that factor is, you need to be exposed to someone that represents you. So representation is such an important factor in formulating identity. I think the second important factor in identity formulation as it relates to tech and innovation is also like social capital. One of the things that we realized with the gathering, at one point we were seeing about 300 to 400 people every single week at the Venture Cafe Thursday gathering. And even online, the world had to switch to online, even online, consistently over 200 a week. What we realized is our role was to reallocate social capital to people, to create opportunities for them to connect with, for example, there was someone that had like a $10.5 billion fund who would regularly be there and connect them with entrepreneurs. May not invest it, but the fact that you're having a conversation with an investor of that caliber really makes a difference. And then also, the social capital that you develop, not just transactional, but real relational exchanges, that cultivated intimacy is what actually opens up opportunities.
It does.
Every single thing that I have been able to do, every opportunity that has come my way, has most definitely come through relationship building, and not one where I'm looking at what can I get from you, or what do I need to do for you to do X, Y, and Z for me. It's more like, how can I help? How can I add value? And that space of cultivating relationships that are meaningful, authentic, and deep is what really unlocks opportunities. And I think that's important for creating identities that are inclusive for innovators and tech founders.
Awesome. Boy, ooh, I'm getting chills just thinking about all that. Now, you talked about READY. So tell me about what READY stands for and the importance of that in this tech space.
So I am quite lazy. And the way that kind of manifests itself is that I create models and frameworks to simplify thinking, because I'm like, this is too complicated, let's simplify it, make it more accessible. And the second way, as my team knows, I just create acronyms, because nobody wants to say, is an ecosystem characterized by racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. It's just ready.
It's just ready.
And I also think that the term ready helps you think about being empowered, taking action, understanding that the imperative, both the moral, cultural, and practical imperative around being ready as a community, as a tech ecosystem, is something that we all have a shared responsibility to execute. So that's kind of what READY means. It's just an acronym. And that's the lens through which we as a team at AirVentures see building ecosystems. And the work that we do is really around strategy. How do you develop an ecosystem of support for tech, innovation, entrepreneurship that's strategic, that is actually ready? And what I also say is ecosystems don't come out of thin air. Like ready ecosystems don't appear out of thin air, hence the name AirVentures. They have to be intentionally designed. They have to have a bottom-up approach. They have to think about everybody. You got to design for the person that's most susceptible to an ecosystem that is not ready, to ensure that it truly is accessible for everybody.
Now, how have you managed any technology partners or folks in the tech space that may have pushed back because, you know, the folks that you have been seeking to empower and engage don't look like them? How have you been able to navigate that?
So that's a really good question. It's funny, I wrote a blog post about this last week. So the concept of ready does not mean it is a zero-sum game. And I think that's the common misnomer when we're talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion. People often approach it from a standpoint that if someone else is empowered, I am therefore losing my power. If someone else has more, I therefore must have less. It's not how the pie works. It is not that way at all. It is actually more of a focus that says, we are coming from a place of abundance. There's more than enough for everybody. But actually the community will operate better. It'll be more efficient. It'll actually be more resilient, more productive, and more valuable from like an economic standpoint if we all get a chance to participate. And so I think what we're seeing in this moment, there's been this national dialogue and spotlight around these issues that it's no longer an afterthought. It is a clear imperative that we must lead with readiness. And the challenge that we're seeing is most people don't know how. A lot of leaders in a lot of communities are saying, well, we know we have to change, but we have no idea how. And that's where, you know, my team and an organization like AirVentures and so many across the country are saying, well, we've been doing this. Not only have we been doing this, but our metrics and our measurable outcomes can demonstrate to you that we got the receipts. We have a methodology. Let us work in partnership with you to ensure that communities really are for everyone. And so oftentimes when it's approached through a lens of this is an imperative that we all have a shared responsibility for. Secondly, we're here to help, not to supplant you and not to tear you down. And also, this is a cultural shift we're all trying to make. And so there's no blame game here. We find that leaders and communities are much more receptive.
Awesome. Love it. Well, we are going to take a break right here, but when we come back, I want to hear more about some of the projects that you have going on.
Okie dokie.
All right. Stay tuned for more conversations.
Conversations with Nicole.
You know, if you know me, you know I'm a TV freak. I watch television all the time. And when I think about the number 10, the first thing that comes to mind is the Family Feud, because there's always questions about rating your answer on a scale of 1 to 10. But I gotta tell you, 10 is always on top of 1 to 10. It's a major milestone. Now, for wedding anniversaries, they acknowledge it with wood. But I think in terms of conversations with Nicole, we have reached a golden moment. It's the 10th season of Conversations with Nicole. I like that.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about Conversations with Nicole. Let's talk about Let's talk about Let's talk about Conversations with Nicole.
Welcome back to Conversations with Nicole. If you're just joining us, I am here with author, leader, strategist, Miss Leigh-Ann Buchanan, and we have been talking about tech and innovation and readiness. Readiness being racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. So before the break, you were telling me about how in the tech space, it's not a, you know, as you invite others who have not traditionally been in the tech space, doesn't mean that something is being taken away from those that are in it, but we can all add value. We can all come together and be creative and benefit as a community.
Exactly.
So, you know, you are doing some great things here.
Thank you.
You know, I have done some research on you. And you have a program called the NIA Project. NIA meaning purpose.
Yes.
Which is for the youth. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Sure. So NIA Project is absolutely my favorite thing in the world.
Okay.
I founded the NIA Project in 2014, and essentially what we do is we're thinking about, again, a lot of what I do is around systems, but what are those systemic gaps in access to opportunity that we can fill? And the two things that we're trying to solve for is leadership development for youth of color. And I'm happy to share a little bit around like the thesis or the theory of change of our leadership model. And secondly, what we really expanded in the last year or so is college strategy, college access. You know, last year, 2.1 million kids who graduated went on to college. So about 66% of kids who graduated from high school went to college. Only 50% of Black students who graduate matriculate to college, and only 63.4% of Latino students who graduate matriculate to college. The numbers are much higher for Asian and white Americans, 90%, 89, 90%. So there's a gap. And on the college access side, like I've never paid for school. I didn't pay for undergrad, I didn't pay for law school. I haven't paid for executive programs at Columbia Graduate School of Business or Harvard School of Business.
Okay.
And I realized, because I've been coaching kids for the last 10 years about how to win scholarships, is the disconnect for a lot of disadvantaged youth is they don't know they need a strategy. They're told if you get good grades, or for example, if you get a good SAT score, you're automatically in. Where we know that there is a $2 billion college readiness industry, where the average price of like individual coaching for wealthy families is about $10,000.
Wow.
It's about $200 an hour. Even group-based coaching market rate is about $5,000 per person, per student. So if your family is free and reduced lunch, first generation, low to moderate income, that is inaccessible for you.
Absolutely.
But though the strategic support is what really makes the difference between not just getting in, but getting money for those that really need it. And so we've been coaching the NIA fellows for the last, 6 years to get into college. NIA Project boasts 100% college matriculation rate and a 95% win rate on scholarships. Actually, it was close to 100% the last 3 years. So our fellows have collectively won over $10 million in scholarships, and we've only had 75 fellows in the last 6 years. And so I took all of that content that I developed, worked with the team, and just put it in a platform to make it accessible to youth that wouldn't have that strategic support. And the difference is everything out there on the internet is like, it's an aggregator. Here's a list. Here are things you should do. But no one's teaching you strategically, what do I need to do at every step of the way to actually get in and win scholarships.
Wow, wow, wow. So what's been the impact in terms of on the students? You know, what's been some of the feedback that you've received from them?
So overwhelmingly, the reason why we started expanding it beyond our fellows is our fellows were just taking what I was teaching and teaching their friends.
Okay.
And so we said, okay, let's expand this. And then on the fellowship, the other part of the program, the leadership training, is we believe travel awakens leaders. And so NIA fellows do an experiential leadership fellowship abroad. Paused currently because of circumstances.
Right.
But our fellows have gone mostly to sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, so Namibia, South Africa, Ghana. We were slated to go to Rwanda. We've been to Indonesia. And those fellowship experiences are transformative. They really change the mindset, the way of thinking, and the potential to really have an impact in our communities. We've had fellows that have gone on to get special awards from mayors. One of our fellows was a Black Girls Rock awardee.
Wow.
Written books, done documentaries, national, Girl Up campaign ambassador globally. We have some amazing fellows.
That is awesome.
And the experiential leadership model, I think, really makes the difference.
Okay. So what's next for Nia?
So next for Nia, we've just brought on our first director. And so we actually have like a 1.5 person staff.
Okay.
And our goal is really to focus on bringing access online everywhere. We have this crazy goal that we want Nia Project to be present in 25 cities by 2030.
Okay.
And that's going to be through access online and then slowly expanding the fellowship program. But the gap I told you, that 50.7% for Black students getting into college, 63.4% for Latino students, I want to close that gap. And that's what Access Online is designed to do.
Okay, so that's your goal.
That's the goal.
All right, all right. Now, Innovation City,
Okay.
that is your podcast. Tell me about that.
So Innovation City is a podcast that I co-host with my colleague Tyler Kelly in partnership with Slam Digital Media, who has offices in St. Louis and Miami. And it's interesting because I've been behind the scenes since the beginning. We actually just released seasons 3 and 4, but I was behind the scenes like creative direction, helping to select the talent, and then recently for season 3 and 4, Tyler said, hey, do you want to come out and be a co-host?
Okay.
And so finally I said yes. But why I love Innovation City is that we're telling the stories of disruptors, of innovators in markets that, well, now people think about Miami, but before people weren't thinking about Miami as a place where they're really innovating in unique ways. It's not just technology, social impact, it's community change, it's conversation platforms. And it's, for me, an encapsulation of this idea that innovation really is for everyone. And we've been told that innovation is just for some. And the typical moniker, as you talked about, was often like white, male, wealthy
Right.
from Silicon Valley, just like like the TV show Silicon Valley, right? And what I love about Innovation City is that it disabused people of the notion that innovation is reserved for some. And the stories that we tell, it's really just a platform to get more stories out there, to show, since I've come on board, that there are people behind the innovation and to really dig into their whys. I think the whys and who they are and what in their story helps shape them is inspiring to a lot of people. And that's why I love doing it.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask you about storytelling and how important you believe that is, but I think you've answered it in terms of the why. I think human beings are compelled by stories.
We are creatures that are hardwired for connection. If you look at neuropsychology, there's a lot of stories that show how there's a lot of research that shows how the synapses light up during storytelling. Most traditions around the world are oral, it's storytelling driven. And if you think about it, people make decisions based off of emotional connectivity. So for me, visual storytelling is really the medium that I'm exploring more deeply, because there's a part of your brain called the reticular activating system. It's like right at the back, but it's the part of your brain that processes input and relevant information. And that is most informed and most influenced by stories. If a story comes, it's more likely to go into the long-term memory versus the short-term memory. It's gonna have more of an impression on you.
Absolutely. So we are embarking upon Women's History Month. And I want to know, what is the legacy of Leigh-Ann? What do you hope that people remember you for?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not a big fan of legacy, but I've been thinking a lot about that question. So the mantra I told you at the beginning is actually just kind of a shorter way of what I believe is my personal mission, which is to connect people with purpose so that they might exponentially expand their impact. And that with purpose part looks like a variety of different things. But I think the legacy that I would like to leave, I hope will be found in the ways of thinking that I'm hoping to share with the world through some of the writing that I'm doing. I got like 6 books like in my head that I'm eager to just focus on writing. But I think that that's a way of reaching more people. Like legacy can be found in written media and in movies and in the creative spaces that can inspire people and give them tools, practical tools to help improve their lives or think differently.
Absolutely.
But I think it's really just going to be around, models for a more simplistic and accessible way of being purposeful.
Okay, good deal. Now, what's the best advice you've either given or received?
So the best advice that I don't know if I've been given, but maybe someone said this, but I've been thinking about a lot is, so my strength finder, one of my major strengths is achiever. The rest are all in strategy.
Okay.
But achievers tend to be like very check the box and like achievement driven. And as you can probably tell, I'm very type A and I've done very well because that's what I go after. Recently, I've really focused on like, what does purpose really mean? And so the best advice that I would give is do not focus on outcomes. And I know that sounds crazy as someone that like seems very outcome driven. If you focus on the experience of learning, the process of learning in any endeavor, you're going to be focusing on the right thing. But if you focus on the outcome, you miss the learning and the value of the experience.
Okay.
So
not the destination, but the journey.
always.
Love it. All right. And what do you believe is your greater work?
I think my greater work is just as I said in the mission statement. I think the greater work, my faith is really important to me, and I believe that we are all here to serve. But what service looks like is actually unique and very personal. It is a function of how do you understand your what and your why, and what is like for purpose and with purpose. And so when you talk about like the why, like my why is to have impact. It's to really, add value to people, but in a very intentional way. And the what looks like knowing what my superpowers are. And the what looks like creating things, platforms, whether it's writing, whether it's, podcasts, whether it's media, whether it's, the Venture Cafe program, whether it's the project, that can actually be vehicles for that impact.
Awesome. Well, it has truly been a delight to chat with you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. And thank you for joining us on Conversations with Nicole, where we're connecting the community through conversations. We'll see you next time.